But Gordon, we are delighted to have you, and you can tell us a little bit about your credentials for being the person who explains the Northern Great Plains area that WWF is working with.
I'll be delighted to provide a little bit of background information. You saw that map outlining the Northern Great Plains. Well, some time ago, the World Wildlife Fund decided we were winning some battles and losing the war, and we weren't envisioning conservation on the scale at which actually ecological systems and evolutionary processes worked. So we decided we really needed to be thinking at a different scale. We had a bunch of workshops, and we came up with this notion of the ecoregion, which is a large enough region that has certain similarities in its vegetation and climate. And if we can manage at that scale, we can have the possibility of really working with the ecological and evolutionary processes rather than just piecemeal. So we developed this ecoregion map of the world. And what you saw there was the Northern Great Plains ecoregion. And so then what we're doing with the program that Martha Kaufman heads up is to think, what would success look like for that ecoregion? And you're looking at individual cases, individual projects as to how they're contributing overall to what success would look like in the region, who we have to work with to accomplish that, who are our friends, who are the enemies that can you overpower them or get around them, the whole business. So it's been a very exciting thing. I've been involved in it right from the beginning, and I'm still on the advisory board to the Northern Great Plains program. And I just must say, it's been one of the most exciting things in my life to participate in this. And Martha Kaufman is their director, as you saw. She has done such a wonderful job that just recently she was promoted to being a vice president of World Wildlife Fund overall, and for the leadership that she has developed. And when Carter Roberts, the CEO of World Wildlife Fund, wants to talk about successes, he always talks about the Northern Great Plains and saying this wonderful it is that we're thinking on scale, working with tribes, working with private people, looking at all these dimensions, to how in the face of expansions climatically and everything, how can you achieve success? And that's what we're trying to do. And she gave you, I think, a wonderful picture of what's going on. And she's been just a fantastic director. She's by background a limnologist, that she studies freshwaters, and her background was to study the fishes in the small streams in the Great Plains. So with that, I'll step back. You asked about me. I'm an ecologist, mostly studied birds, but I've got heavily involved then in thinking about applications of ecological research to conservation. And so I've been heavily involved in that. And I've been a member of the board of World Wildlife Fund, and now I'm an emeritus board member. And I'm probably the leading scientist on this effort to have conservation success in the Northern Great Plains.
Thank you. Raise your hand or just start with your question. Bill Roach?
Well, unfortunately, we didn't hear the full presentation, but what we did get is 2 of the 3 players that you want to be working with, the private owners and the tribes. Who is the 3rd player that she was working?
Public.
The 3rd.
The public.
Is a public.
Well,
all right.
As you saw from the presentation, had almost very little of the land is public. And so the only public part you did see was the National Park Service and trying to develop the tribal national park, would be the first time ever. That is part of now the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation. It is public land. And in honor of how we generally treat the Indians, we use that reservation as a bombing range for practice in World War II. So there's a lot of unexploded ordnance and things that'll have to be taken care of before we can have the realization of a tribal national park, which is really exciting. All those Indians in that area are bison people. The bison was the center of their culture, and they all want bison back, and we're bringing bison back in various places, which is really exciting. And as you saw from Martha's presentation, the bison is an enormously impressive animal.
About the 10,000.
Tom Sparrow had a question.
Gordon, can you tell us what some of these successes are in the Northern Great Plains conservation?
Would you repeat it? Our volume, we just got it turned up. Sorry.
Tell us about some of the stories, some of the successes of conservation in this area.
Okay. Well, what we started in eastern Montana, and that was an area where when Lewis and Clark came through, the wildlife was incredible. That's where Clark was run into a river by a grizzly bear, and it was where there's a lot of this unplowed natural grassland. They're all in private, and we started working with the ability to buy land and convert it into conservation, and this became so successful that the World Wildlife Fund then spawned the American Prairie Reserve, which is an independent organization, and it does the negotiating and it buys the land. World Wildlife Fund does not want to become a big landowner, so the American Prairie Reserve is buying up ranches, and these are sold by willing sellers because most of these ranchers don't have any Social Security, anything like that. What they can retire on is what they can sell the ranch for. And so this has been going on. And then we spawned the American Prairie Reserve, and sort of it's operating on its own. And those of us with the WWF program are now working. Our biggest success so far is with the tribes, because we facilitated bringing back bison to several tribal lands that didn't have bison before. And we've helped them figuring out how to do it, what you need to do because you got to keep these bison inside. And as Martha indicated, they'll easily jump a 5-foot fence. So what do you do? How do you teach them not to do that? When we bring bison in, we put them in quarantine, and you teach them what an electric fence is. And so you automate them, and they learn that this is an electric fence, and it's something you don't want to walk into. And so the areas are fenced with for the bringing back the bison. It's very simple little electric fences, and because you couldn't trying to build fences that bison won't cross, and a typical fence, if they don't jump it, they just plow through it. This is a really powerful animal. So our biggest success, I think, so far has been with working with the tribes and bringing bison back on the areas where they didn't have them before. Another thing that sort of got cut out is working with the ranchers and the Sustainable Beef Initiative, since most of that is private land. And what we want to do is to keep the ranchers in business and make it profitable to raise cows there, because the alternative, and I've seen this, a plant will go on and growing crops to produce ethanol to feed cars. And that is an awful, awful alternative. So we're working with these ranchers and trying to help make ranching profitable, and that beef coming from the sustainable ranches that will have a premium on price that people will be willing to pay for it. And one important thing that she didn't mention that I think I need to emphasize important is how important it is for grasses to be bashed and grazed by big grazing animals. But in the absence of grazing, the grasses build up, they suppress new growth, and what big grazing mammals like bison and properly done cows rapidly recycle what's going on, because they graze down the grass, new grass appears, the pee and poop from the bison and other mammals enrich the grassland, and you rapidly increase the recycling rate so that you get much more productivity out of a bit of land in grassland when it's heavily grazed, not overgrazed, but heavily grazed. And the notion that you want to save grassland by taking the big mammals off and the bison, the cows off, that's the worst thing you can do to a grassland.
Bill?
Again, in terms of sustainable beef, there's a growing interest in grass-fed beef for consumption. And I'm curious if grass-fed beef as a marketing is something that your group is doing anything in or working to achieve.
Yes, it is. And indeed, cows do magnificently on grass. The reason they go into these feed lots and are fed corn, which is not what cows like to eat, and it's terrible on their digestion, and you have to use a lot of antibiotics. That just simply speeds up the growth, and that's why it's done. So with the sustainable ranching business, we're encouraging the ranchers to be able to bring the whole thing to completion right on the ranch land itself. And we're fostering small abattoirs that can move around, and you don't have to bring them into the big feedlot. And grass-fed beef is just wonderful. It's tender. And yeah, yes, definitely we're working on that. And if you go to the market, well, one, you can get bison now because bison is being commercial, but also look for grass-fed beef, and that means it's fed on the grass and it's not fattened in cattle feedlots with corn. Yes. So what?
We intend to try to introduce that more here as a something that we can serve as an option.
Yes, I mean, we can ask the dining room here and our suppliers to provide us with grass-fed beef that's more ecologically sustainable, and those that want their beef but want less environmental destruction, an option for you. But bison also belt and park. Bison produce methane just like cows do. So you don't get rid of that by substituting bison for cows. That's still going on.
Mm-hmm.
Do that.
Carol Roach,
Sitting against the light.
you have to unmute yourself.
Yeah, I did. Martha showed a map of Wyoming with huge red patches showing projected expansion in oil and gas production by 2020. So I'm not sure when that video was made, but now we can ask, did the projection prove to be true? Of course, I hope that it didn't, because that was pretty scary.
Well, much of that, unfortunately, has proven to be true. But the reason there's still a lot of that beautiful blue stuff that she showed in another picture,
Mhm.
those tend to be drier, a little bit more difficult to farm. And so where the encroachment is, which you mostly saw it in the precipitation in the northern Great Plains is heavier to the east, and it drops as you head toward the Rockies, and so it gets drier, and it becomes less valuable as farmland. And but you can't plow and grow. Although one of the things she did point out that we're looking, and the geneticists are developing wheat varieties that can grow with less water, and that's genetically wonderful, ecologically bad. Because that means you can plow up and grow wheat in those areas. But unfortunately, the Northern Great Plains program also produces an annual plow print report, which she didn't discuss. And that indicates on the map form all the areas that were plowed the previous year that had not been, were not under plow before. And also, which ones are being returned to grassland after being plowed. And this can happen. I was on one of the ranches in Montana, or no, actually it was South Dakota, and an area that had been plowed and was sown back to natural grasses. And after 2 years, I went there and we saw it, and it was full of bobolinks, which is one of the birds that just goes out with that. And so changes can be done, and that is right now a small fraction of what's happening. There's more being plowed than restored, but we have this annual plow print report in which we document that. And unfortunately, Carol, some of that bad stuff is becoming true. I can't tell you just exactly relative to that, but there's a lot of bad news there still, yeah.
Thank you.
I wish I could give you a better answer or a more favorable answer, but still we're hopeful, since a lot of that where it's drier and it is less adaptable for agriculture. It does well under grass, and all the great grassland birds all do wonderful with cows. They all love it, and with bison. They love it. They're much better than if ungrazed pastures. Only the wallows, but the prairie dog towns feature all sorts of birds that are never found anywhere else, like mountain burrowing owls. They are dominated and live only in these areas where the prairie dogs are, because burrowing owls live in prairie dog burrows. Unlike the ferrets, they don't eat
Amazing.
insects, but the black-footed ferret is the rarest mammal in North America, and it was almost totally wiped out by plague, which is not native to North America. It was introduced in Australia in about 1905, and it has spread, and it's just it's affected a little bit human beings, but prairie dogs, not having evolved with plague, are just slaughtered by it. And we're having dusting of burrows and vaccinating ferrets and everything to try to deal with plague, which is a horrible, and it's introduced disease, and we're hoping genetically the prairie dogs will adapt, but that's going to be a slow process. Meanwhile, we have to dust the burrows.
May I interject a comment about Carol's asking about the Bakken oil fields? The main market for the development of Bakken and other fossil fuels in that upper Great Plains area has been for export to Asia. And we can thank all of us and hundreds of people in the Northwest for shutting down one export terminal after another, so that within the Northwest is the closest way to get across the North Pacific to China, Japan, and Korea, and so on. There are still export terminals that have been going on from previously, including we're exporting coal at previous export terminals, but there is a still developing project in British Columbia for big export. I think it's of gas, maybe oil, but we have basically killed off all the Washington and Oregon proposals. So thanks to us, but it takes a long time to shut down the fossil fuel industry. I had a question, Gordon.
Yes.
About the buffalo. As I remember, there were going to be problems that ranchers hated the idea of buffalo bison in Yellowstone being let loose because they would carry a particular disease. You talked about some of the bison that were brought into particular Indian lands being quarantined for a while, but how in general is that disease progressing, and to what extent is it blocking the redevelopment of bison herds?
Okay, that's an excellent question. And the disease is brucellosis. And it's again an imported disease. That brucellosis is not native to North America. It was brought into North America on cows, imported with cows. Then it spread from cows to bison and elk. And then there was a tremendous campaign by the agricultural government agencies to get rid of brucellosis in cattle by vaccinations and everything else. And so then a state gets designated as brucellosis free, which Montana is. But there we are with Yellowstone and Grand Teton there having brucellosis in both bison and elk. And so the question, so that is, if you are going to take Yellowstone bison and move them somewhere else, you have to put them in quarantine to get back to brucellosis. And so that takes an enormous amount of effort. Somebody put themselves. Okay. The so the brucellosis campaign, one is to you can vaccinate the bison, and many of the bison that have been brought into the Indian reservations now did come from Yellowstone, and they had to go through a quarantine and for a long time before they can be released. The one place where you can get brucellosis-free bison, interesting, these are Montana Plains bison. They were almost eliminated, and somebody bought up some herd and put them into Elk Island National Park in Alberta. So Elk Island National Park, Alberta, has a wild herd of Montana Plains bison without brucellosis. And so they are now being brought back into the United States as brucellosis free. So the brucellosis issue is very real. Contamination or transfer from bison or elk to cattle has not been demonstrated, but it is a theoretical possibility. And the way it works now, if brucellosis shows up in one cattle herd in Montana, the whole state gets shut down. So it is a very serious economic impact to prevent this from happening. And so a lot of the resistance to moving bison around has been related to brucellosis. Now that is being handled, but it still appears to be endemic. And one of the problems too with brucellosis, it's in elk, and so much of the big population of the Yellowstone region of elk comes down in winters in Wyoming, and there's a big national range there. And you can go out and where they feed the elk in the winter, and so the elk are just full of this brucellosis. And we've tried to get the Wyoming state to stop all that big feeding, but elk hunting is an enormous economic thing in Wyoming, and they refuse to do it. So it's maintained there, and it seems to be that brucellosis is being maintained in wild elk now at a low level. So, but we're not trying to bring elk out because they spread out all over on their own. It's the bison that has been involved in trying to recolonize. But brucellosis has been a big issue. It's required a lot of work, but I think we got it licked. Luckily, you can eat brucellosis-infected meat and you don't get it. But that doesn't satisfy most people.
Other questions?
Sam? Sam? Did you have your hand up?
You gotta unmute him.
Unmute, Sam.
Okay. You are a very important and very knowledgeable environmentalist, and very much into addressing the concerns associated with climate change. And in line with Jean's line of questioning, as I watched, what impressed me or depressed me was the vast amount of areas still being and earmarked for coal and oil production, which especially coal, which seems on its way out, but still. So, is there anything in what's being done in the from the government perspective of government lands and the kinds of things being developed that you've been talking about today, to spread, to provide any kind of source of income future for Montana, Wyoming, and North Dakota, especially for us, instead of pursuing gas, coal, gas, and oil. I mean, the damage, with fracking and all of that is there doesn't seem to be any stopping it, though.
Yeah, well, it's not only is this is a very important question, as Martha pointed out. In this area, almost all the land is private, so
Right.
Government, and what little is governmental is in national park or wildlife refuge, so that it's under special stuff. There just isn't a lot of public land out there. So almost all of the work that we're doing and the other environmental groups are doing is to deal with private land.
Right.
So how do you, and for much of the area there where you saw the red and where it's, what we need to do is find economic opportunities for the people. So rather than selling out to putting in a methanol plant to feed cars, we're trying to make it economically viable for those people to stay on the ranch. Right. And that requires having cows viable, because that's the only alternative there. So that's why we're much into a sustainable beef program and working with the ranchers and trying to get opportunities that will keep them on, so that it's their own private land. And if they can't make it that way, they're going to sell out for the ethanol company. I mean, they're going to do it. And there's no governmental programs or anything else that can or will stop them. And that's going to be their economic interest. So this is a real battle. Can we find economic opportunities that will help these people become viable and still stay ranching on the land? And Martha did mention one thing with the dancing grouse. Well, she showed a picture of this one ranching farm where they have made an industry, tourist industry, out of providing watching opportunities for sage grouse, prairie chickens, and sharp-tailed grouse. And I actually went once and spent 2 nights in the hide watching at those that ranch. It's interesting. I don't know how much they've made on this. We made a lot of publicity out of it and giving him honors and how you're doing that. I just think it's kind of a minor thing. We've just got to make ranching profitable. I mean, there's a few of this rest is helping. It's fun, and you ought to go and watch to see this the prairie chickens and the sharp-tailed grouse dancing, because it's really wonderful. But I think economically, that's always going to be a pretty minor thing. Cattle ranching has to be made profitable, period. And otherwise, it's going to go out. Sorry, I don't have better news.
Gene, you're muted.
I think this is calling for another program that we'll put on. We'll get somebody with the economics of what is the market doing to the coal industry and how can we help. Let's use our biologist for his expertise and who has.
Well, that's what I was hoping. As a biologist, he would come up with either crops or animals, if reared, healthy ones. For Israel, for instance, uses lots of turkeys. Turkey is a great source of protein per pound of animal, and I think much less harmful to the environment. It's a small example, but that's what I was wondering.
Yeah. For the Northern Great Plains, the animal option is bison, and cows, and both of them belch methane. They both do these things. But again, if you're going to have a vibrant prairie full of all, she just didn't begin to show the birds that are out there on the prairie. Magnificent stuff in the spring when you go out there, because there's no trees. All the birds sing in the spring by getting up into the air and flying. And that Sprague's pipit she showed go up so high you can't see them. and you can hear the sound coming down. So just magnificent, the aerial display, that big long-billed curlew she showed you there. And it's marvelous, but there aren't this vibrant prairie that is grazed, whether it's by cows or by bison. Prairie birds don't much care, actually. It's that ecosystem, with the grazing being absolutely fundamental, that is going to be the future there. And so that's why so much of our work has been to sustainable beef, because the alternative is going to be a plant going in that's going to grow crops to make fuel to feed cars. And that's the realistic option there. There's no other thing coming. And there aren't going to be enough turkeys out there, Sam, I'm sorry.
Well, we eat a lot of turkey.
We got plenty of turkeys in Washington, D.C. Other questions?
Yeah, Marie.
Bill has his hand up.
Okay, Bill?
Yes, you talked about bison and their importance to the Native American. And is that the importance in terms of production? How are they utilizing the bison in terms of, from a economic standpoint? Are they raising them for meat? Are they for their pelts? What?
Okay, yeah, the bison are, as Martha pointed out, absolutely central to these people. They were all bison people. And as we're, so they have this incredible cultural value, all these dance, and there's just so much associated with the bison, but they also eat them. Bison meat is wonderful. It's grass-fed, and they are raising these bison, and they're able to harvest a certain amount of this, providing a lot of meat for the people on the reservations, because the nutrition of the Indians on the reservations is just terrible. Poverty is bad diets. And so bringing in grass-fed bison from their own lands has been very, very important now in the nutrition of these people. And they're going to have to have some export too. But the prime source of extra food that they can buy meat is from the bison themselves. And so, they're going to be slaughtered and eaten and on a sustainable basis. And if you go to the Indian reservations, as I've done a few times, and they want to show you a wonderful dinner, they give you bison.
Thank you.
I'm delighted they do.
Tom Sparrow has a question.
How hard is it to bring the farms back to grassland? Gordon, what's done about that, the restoration of grassland?
Okay. The best way to restore grasslands is not to lose them in the first place. So, right. Restoration is much harder than preservation, always. And so, to the degree we can, we're trying to prevent the grasslands from being plowed. But we're also working on, and the big problem then with restoration right now on grasslands is that you need seed of the native grasses. The kind of grass seed that's available commercial for planting is imported Eurasian grasses, and you don't want to put those out. And so developing a seed supply for native grasses is one of the big things that is needed to be done. The one that I did see where the bobolinks were, those are native prairie grass seeds that were put in there, but there's a supply problem on the native grass seed, because you got to have an industry growing grass seed and seed of just the native grasses. And most of the grass seed enterprise in the United States is for bringing in Eurasian grasses, which are planted all over, and we emphatically do not want those. So there's then it's a matter, once you've got the supply and you're able to plant, mostly It turns out you can leave them alone. They're adapted to the place. The grasses know what to do. So, as I mentioned to other people at times, wildlife management, as the field is called, is almost 95% human management. Now, the wildlife knows how to manage itself quite well. It's most of us getting out of the way to let them do it.
Jean, you're muted.
What is the current situation about the Pine Ridge Reservation Sioux Dakota working with the National Park Service? And is that national park going to happen, the tribal one? And what comes next on that?
Very good question. And it's a very frustrating situation because the tribal leadership changes every 2 years. And we've had to go through education of the new tribal leaders. It took a long battle to get the US government to agree to letting the thought of tribes managing a reservation or a national park was pretty much anathema to the feds. The feds have come around, and now the biggest problem is within the tribes themselves. And one of the people we have hired in the Northern Great Plains program is a wonderful woman who's Lakota Sioux. She's one of them, college educated. She's got 2 daughters going to Harvard, a wonderful woman, and she's one of them. And she is our message person there, working with all those people around, finding out what you do want. If we want to try to make a tribal national park, what do you want? What do you hope to get out of this? What do we need to do to work with you? And this is a long haul, because not surprisingly, they're very suspicious of outsiders. Because as I mentioned, we use their tribal land as a bombing range in World War II. So that we've given them ample reason to be suspicious of us. And it's a long haul in developing trust. And we found that we had one of us as a liaison for a while. And it's just absolutely essential that we hire one of them. And she turns out to be wonderful. And she's meeting with them. And but it's going to be slow, because every 2 years we get a new bunch of tribal leaders, and there isn't yet the deep culture. There's a deep culture about bison. There is no deep culture about, say, developing and running a national park. That is something very contrary to the tribal thinking. I don't know. I thought for a while we were going to be pretty close to it, and we got the Fish and Wildlife Service and the Park Service around. And then we got a new election of the tribal people, and it all fell apart. So don't hold your breath. I think it's going to come, but I will be very surprised if I'm there for the ceremony.
So can you tell us what a rancher has to do to get a sustainability label?
Actually, it's quite easy for the ranchers to get that rating, because the sustainable beef that generally they haven't overgrazed the pasture. They've been pretty good stewards. The problem with the way the land has been managed is that every place gets sort of the same moderately heavy grazing. And what we have is a whole bunch of wildlife species, some of which like it not grazed at all, some of which like it totally bashed. And when the grazing system was managed by bison, that's what you got. They ignored some places, didn't go there, bashed others, and so you got this incredible mosaic. And what we're trying to do in getting the change in management with the ranchers to actually mimic more closely how it looked like when bison were running it. And that just means moving cattle more, leaving places untouched, getting these sort of changes to happen. And then you get an explosion of wildlife that you didn't have under the situation when everything was just almost uniformly grazed. But there isn't an awful lot that they really have to do. We're doing a lot of bird censusing on ranch lands, and some of the ranchers are participating in it, and we're getting them to take real pride in their lark buntings and long-billed curlews and burrowing owls, and they do. I'll just tell one brief story. We went down to the grasslands there in what is it? Nebraska, excuse me, Nebraska Sandhills. And we went, our little advisory group, and met with these people. And first, they were very suspicious. We thought we were some kind of a Trojan horse coming, because they knew that WWF International was very much dedicated to getting rid of cows. And they said, okay, what are these people? What are they up to? We had to spent some time with them and let them know that no, this isn't a Trojan horse. We're in favor of cows. We want to keep them with cows, and we could see the sort of the trust evaporating. And I was out in the field with one of the guys who was sort of the head person and who had done all his homework, looking what WWF International was doing, and he was the one that was probably the most suspicious of all. And I was out in the field with him, and he said, "Gordon, I want to tell you about my burrowing owls." And I knew, okay, we made it. We made it. And that's, to hear him say that was just unbelievably touching for me. You know, that, okay, I believe you. I know you love burrowing owls, and I want to tell you I do too. That was a precious moment in my life. Tom?
So as I understand it, most cows are grazed for a couple of years, and then they get taken to feedlots and fed a lot of stuff. What do you do with a grass-fed cow at that point? You just let them further graze?
Yes, they're just, you go to the feedlots and feed them on corn is that you can fatten them faster. That's all.
Right.
You speed it up, and time is money. So even though cows don't like to eat corn, they have to be fed a lot of antibiotics. It's a horrible food for them. They don't like it. They're evolved to eat grass, not seeds. But it speeds it up. So it's purely economic. You can fatten them up and do all of that on grass. It just takes longer.
Okay.
Gordon?
Yes.
Bison managed the land when they had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of miles to roam. Is there any effort to get various tribal lands and adjacent farmers and public land that's adjacent to take down some of the fences, or if you need herding to herd them from one large place to another that's many thousands of acres instead of simply 1,000?
There's a combination of this, because just taking down the fences everywhere isn't really viable. It's never going to happen. But the Nature Conservancy runs a huge ranch in Montana, and they've got pastures, and they offer grazing rates to local ranchers. They give them a lower rate than the commercial if they agree to move their cows around in certain ways to mimic what that's like. So again, and you can do that with the bison in the smaller areas too, where if you don't have enough space to simply let them roam and do all of that, you can accomplish some of that by having fences and moving things to spread it out. So it's a combination of mix. We're hoping to get in the American Prairie Reserve in Montana there a big enough area that you won't have to do anything but just let the bison roam. Some of the smaller places on the Indian reservations where it won't be that much, you're going to have to move them. Yeah, but that can be done. But again, that takes a bit of science and understanding as to what the rate of movement and how you do it to maximize biological diversity on the land, if you do so. Those are doable.
Where is the national park, that's Teddy Roosevelt park, that has a considerable herd of bison? And do you have any contact with them? Are they the wrong kind of bison?
Yes, the Teddy Roosevelt National Park there is in North Dakota. It's in western North Dakota. You had one picture of that with an oil thing in the middle of it there. But it's a large place. That's where Teddy Roosevelt had his summer ranch. And that's in western North Dakota. Beautiful country. You wouldn't think anything like that is in North Dakota. But it's being encroached on. There's almost no place you can be. I've been in that ranch in that grassland, but you can look and you can see the oil derricks. They're approaching so closely, and there's a big battle now because some of that area is national grassland, and we need to keep the oil derricks off. But they do have bison there. There's a pretty good bison herd there. It can roam around, but there's under enormous pressure pulling in from all sides because that's right in the middle of the Bakken Basin. There's a lot of oil under the ground there. But that's in western North Dakota. It's a beautiful place. You can actually visit it. It's worth it. It's surprising. You don't think anything that beautiful is going to be in North Dakota, but there is. It's really lovely, and wild turkeys, and it's a lovely place to visit. There's a road that runs through that you can see stuff and see the bison and the pronghorn. It's a bit of North Dakota that most people don't know exists, and it's gorgeous.
I've always wondered, I haven't been to the Northern Plains for a while, and I was wondering if they were filled with wind generators now. It's the perfect climate for that.
Okay, there are wind farms being developed, but not much out there because you're simply too far from the market. The transportation costs. So where the wind farms are being developed is closer to where you're going to actually need the energy, and there's no demand for it out in the middle there. So that's at the moment not a big problem there. But again, wind farms, again, properly done, there's certain of the grouse and things like that that simply won't go in under the blades. And so there are some losses. So there are some of the birds and mammals that simply won't go into the wind farms. And so you can't have that and have the wildlife too. But right at the moment in the Northern Great Plains, that's not a problem because you're simply too far from the market.
Oh, okay.
Any other questions?
Oh, yes, Gordon, can you hear me?
Yes.
This is John Wren. This has been a very exciting program to me. And I wondered if you could talk to me after the program about who to make contact with regarding opportunities for sustainable bison in the food chain.
Okay.
Yep. So my daughter is working at the CEO level of Albertson Safeway with enormous success, in the fish, sustainability of fisheries sources for the store system, and then repurposing the transportation infrastructure for composting. So, the recent meetings are so optimistic about them taking on a major partnership like this.
Yeah, it's very exciting now, and this is where you and I entered the picture because we're the market.
Yeah,
our behavior can drive the market, and if there's a big demand for sustainable beef, they'll produce it. I mean, they're not. If there's a real economic opportunity, they'll use it, and so part of the work that we're doing in the Northern Great Plains is to try to help create the economic market. But that's something all of us can do, and at Horizon House is determining where our beef comes from is one of them. And these little things all help because a lot of this, the future of all of this is fundamentally going to be market driven. It's not that people are going to get religion. It has to be that this is economically viable, and that's how we have to make that happen.
You also have to make impact on the decision makers, and as director of sustainability within the system now, my daughter is sitting in some pretty important meetings. So I'd love to have her have a discussion with you about this opportunity. She'll be here visiting us in a couple of weeks. So
I'd love to talk to you.
Good. We'll set it up. Thanks, Gordon.
It would be wonderful. And my consultation rates are really low.
Dinner in the terrace?
With or without, yeah, okay.
Grass-fed beef.
Well, thank you all very much. This program, together with the film, will be combined and shown on Thursday evening. I think it did not make it into the alert, though we will try to get it into the elevators. Assuming that the recording of this and getting Hunter to straighten out exactly which 28 minutes we want of the wildlife program. You can tell anybody else that you know to tune in at 7:30 on Thursday, and then it may very well be that we show it another time in addition.
I think it would be well worth showing again. It's a great story. And it's one of these things, so much of environmental stuff is doom and gloom. And this is something where something positive is really happening. And it turns out to be spectacular. I've seen people coming up from California, and I've gone out on the prairie with them, and they walk up to bison, and oh, do they pull out their wallets. This experience of seeing that magnificent animal. And wondering, we could help bring that thing back. I mean, it is really impressive animal. I mean, it's a herd of bison out on the plains, and seeing it is just, that's how we've raised money, get people out there and walk them and get them to see a bison herd. This is something you don't do in cocktail parties.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah.
You're a great asset, Gordon. Thank you very much.
This activity of mine, they're extremely important for me personally. It's very inspiring thing, and that I've been a part of this and able to feel that I'm making a contribution, and that what I know is actually useful. And it's been wonderful for me too, and I still get a thrill walk out in front of some bison. It's awe-inspiring. It really is.
Great. Well, thank you all very much.
Okay.
Thank you.